The missed train Danielle Porter had always thought of herself as a woman who kept her life tightly scheduled, almost as if every minute were stitched together by invisible thread that could unravel if she tugged too hard in the wrong direction. On that particular Thursday evening, however, the thread had already frayed long before she stepped into the echoing station at Market Street. Her entire day had been a trial of patience, of sitting at her desk under the fluorescent buzz of ceiling lights that seemed more intent on draining her energy than illuminating her work. The inbox on her computer had looked like an ocean swelling with waves of new demands. No sooner had she answered one email than two more had come crashing back to shore. Deadlines were stacked like dominoes, each threatening to topple the rest if she faltered even once. By 5 o'clock, when most of her colleagues had already begun loosening their ties and shutting down their computers, Danielle was still hunched over, tightening the last screws on a presentation her manager insisted had to be perfect by morning. Urgent, he had said as if it were his favorite word, one he carried in his back pocket to pull out whenever he wanted to keep her pinned to her chair a little longer. By the time she finally pushed back from her desk, her shoulders stiff and her temples sore, she was thinking only of home, of the quiet, the couch, the blanket she could wrap herself in, and perhaps the silence that would drown out the chaos of the day. When she reached the train station, the crowd reminded her of a tide too, waves of bodies pressing toward the gates, rolling suitcases clicking across the tiles, the murmur of voices weaving together into a dull roar. Danielle clutched her bag to her side as if it carried the last ounce of her patience, her eyes darting up at the digital board that flickered with departure times. She saw it there, her train, the last eastbound service of the night glowing like a beacon that promised salvation. The loudspeaker crackled overhead, the voice flat but commanding. Track 7, last eastbound service now boarding. Danielle's heart jolted at the words. She picked up her pace, weaving through the shifting bodies of commuters who all seemed to have the same desperate energy. She could almost feel the relief of the train seat beneath her, could imagine the rocking motion that would carry her away from the city and back to the quiet suburban streets of Cherry Hill. She could see herself slipping the key into her apartment door, dropping her bag and finally letting her body rest. But just as her eyes caught the silver outline of the train waiting like a lifeline, something in her peripheral vision made her slow. At first it was just movement, something small scattering across the platform. But when she turned her head, she saw him. An elderly man, perhaps in his late 70s, stood hunched near the edge of the platform. One hand gripped a wooden cane so tightly that his knuckles had gone pale, while the other fumbled helplessly with a paper bag that had burst open across the ground. Groceries had spilled everywhere, apples rolling like marbles toward the rails, a loaf of bread flattened beneath careless footsteps, and a carton of milk leaking in a thin stream that spread across the dirty concrete. The man's hands trembled as he bent forward, his cane wobbling dangerously each time he tried to steady himself. His breath came unevenly, each exhale thin and shaky, as if even the simple act of bending down had taken something from him. And yet, what struck Danielle most was not his frailty, but the way people flowed around him like water around a rock in a stream. They sidestepped without pausing, eyes fixed on their phones or the glowing train, not sparing even a glance for the man struggling just feet away from them. Danielle froze. Her muscles tensed, caught in the split second between responsibility and empathy, between the train she could still catch if she hurried, and the old man who looked as though he might collapse if she didn't step in. She could hear the train doors letting out their first warning beep, the conductor glancing toward the last passengers rushing aboard. She whispered to herself, "Come on, Danielle," as though saying the words would make the decision easier, as though her own voice could push her forward toward the train that would take her home. But her eyes wouldn't leave the man. His hand shook as he reached for a rolling apple, his cane wobbling dangerously, and for a terrifying moment she thought she was about to see him fall right there on the platform. Without another thought, Danielle turned away from the train and sprinted toward him. She dropped to her knees, her hands sweeping across the cold concrete as she scooped up the runaway apples before they could tumble onto the tracks. "Here, let me help you," she said, her voice gentle but firm. The old man let out a thin laugh, the kind that carried more weariness than humor. "Thank you, miss. I thought I had it handled, but these hands don't quite do what they used to." Danielle gave him a soft smile, her fingers plucking the squashed bread from the ground. "That's all right. Groceries can be tricky, even for me, and I don't have a cane." She lifted the milk carton carefully, noting the stream that leaked from the corner. "This one's a goner, I'm afraid," she said lightly. He sighed, shaking his head with resignation. "Well, there goes tomorrow's coffee." They shared a brief smile, but behind them, the train gave its final chime, and Danielle looked up just in time to see the silver doors slide shut with finality. The sound of the wheels grinding against the rails filled the station, and she knew she had missed it. For a moment, frustration hit her with a sharp sting. This wasn't just any train, it was the last one home. Without it, she faced an hour of late buses that might not even come on time. Or worse, a rideshare she could barely afford after the month's expenses had already drained her budget. But when she looked back at the old man, at the gratitude shining in his eyes despite the tremble in his hands, the sting softened into something else. He straightened as best he could, his cane bearing most of his weight, and Danielle gathered the last of the scattered groceries into the torn paper bag. "Let me at least help you carry these," she offered. His voice came steadier this time, touched with warmth. "You're a kind young woman. My name's Walter. Walter Hensley." Danielle adjusted the bag against her hip and extended her hand with a polite smile.
"Danielle."
"Danielle Porter." Their handshake was firm, warm despite the chill of the station air, and in that small gesture something unspoken passed between them. Something that told Danielle this was more than a moment of chance, more than a missed train. It felt like the beginning of something she couldn't yet name. They walked slowly toward the exit, Danielle balancing one bag in each hand while Walter leaned on his cane. The night air outside hit them with sharp clarity, the sidewalks glowing under the yellow wash of streetlights. The sounds of the city surrounded them, horns, the hum of traffic, the occasional burst of laughter from strangers walking by. But Danielle felt strangely calm, as though helping Walter had drawn her out of the fog she'd been trapped in all day. She asked lightly where he lived, trying to keep the conversation flowing. "South Philly," Walter said with a faint smile. "Been there most of my life, but I don't drive anymore, and the buses don't always show when they should. I thought I'd try the train tonight, though it didn't exactly go as planned." Danielle chuckled softly, shifting the groceries in her arms. "Public transit never does. I'm in Cherry Hill myself. Without that last train, it looks like it's going to be an expensive night for me." At the corner, Walter stopped, steadying himself against a lamppost, and looked at her with sharp, thoughtful eyes. "Let me make it up to you. I have a driver I call sometimes. Not one of those app rides, a proper driver. He'll take you home." Danielle frowned, shaking her head gently. "That's kind of you, but you don't have to do that." "Really, I'll manage." Walter's tone turned firm, though still kind. "I know I don't have to, but kindness shouldn't travel one way. You gave up your train for me, let me give you a ride home. Besides, I could use a hand getting these groceries put away first." Something in his tone disarmed her. It wasn't pushy, just sincere, the sort of voice that carried both dignity and quiet need. Danielle studied him for a moment before nodding. "All right. I'll help you get your groceries home. Then we'll talk about the ride." Walter's smile widened, his weathered face softening. "Fair enough. Thank you, Danielle." And so they started down the sidewalk together, walking at his pace, her arms full of his groceries. The city felt different now, not just a backdrop to her commute, but alive with possibility. Danielle glanced at the man beside her, wondering who he really was, what life had shaped him, and why, despite everything she'd lost by missing her train, she felt that maybe she had gained something far more important, the connection. The walk to Walter's apartment was not far by distance, but it stretched into something more than a simple errand. Danielle found herself slowing her steps to match his pace, each movement of his cane a steady rhythm against the cracked pavement of the Philadelphia sidewalks. The city at night was not unfamiliar to her. She had spent years commuting, years weaving through its noises and flashing lights, but walking beside Walter was different. The urgency that had defined her earlier, the desperate need to make her train, seemed to have evaporated, replaced by a calm curiosity. It was as if missing that train had shifted the very tempo of her evening, slowing her heartbeat, allowing her to notice the things she usually ignored, the way neon signs flickered over corner shops, the way conversations floated from open doorways of diners, the faint smell of roasted chestnuts from a street cart. Walter, though leaning heavily on his cane, seemed to notice everything too. He would pause at intersections not simply because his knees demanded it, but because he wanted to. He'd look around, point out the mural painted on the side of a building, remark on how long ago it had been added, and even tell her which local artist had poured their heart into the paint. Danielle found herself surprised. Here was a man who walked slowly, yet saw so much more than the people who sped by him daily. When they reached his apartment building, a narrow red brick structure tucked between a laundromat and a small deli, Danielle felt the shift again. It was old but dignified, the sort of place that had aged without collapsing, carrying with it the stories of every tenant who had passed through. She followed Walter up the creaking stairs, each step cautious under his weight, and when he opened the door she was greeted not by emptiness or clutter, but by the scent of history. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee grounds, wood polish, and old paper. Family photographs lined the shelves, black and white portraits, sepia wedding pictures, snapshots of birthdays and graduations frozen in time. Set the bags on the counter, Walter instructed gently, gesturing toward the modest kitchen. Danielle obeyed, placing the groceries down, though her eyes wandered across the living room. She spotted a framed photo of a young soldier in uniform, his eyes bright with both pride and fear. She recognized the shape of the jaw, the curve of the smile. It was Walter, decades younger. "That you?" she asked, pointing. Walter chuckled as he lowered himself into an armchair with obvious relief. "Yes, that was me. Army, 1969. My knees were a whole lot stronger then, and my back didn't complain nearly as much." Danielle smiled faintly, sinking onto the edge of the couch. "You look proud in that photo." "I was," he admitted, his eyes distant for a moment. "And scared?" War has a way of making both emotions live side by side. The room fell quiet, and Danielle felt the weight of the silence settle between them. She had never been in this man's home before tonight, never known his name until 20 minutes ago. And yet there was a familiarity in the air, as though kindness itself had forged a connection. She glanced at the time on her phone, realizing how late it had grown, and sighed. "Well, I should probably figure out how to get home." Walter reached for a small flip phone that sat on the side table, pressing the keys with deliberate precision. "Already taken care of. Harvey, my driver, will be here shortly. He'll take you home." Danielle blinked, caught off guard. "You weren't kidding about the driver?" He smiled, the corners of his mouth lifting in quiet amusement. "Old-fashioned maybe, but reliable. You'll be safe with him." Her instinct was to protest again, to argue that she didn't want to take advantage of him, but something about his tone silenced her. It wasn't an offer born of pity or obligation. It was an extension of gratitude, of dignity, of a man who believed kindness was a two-way street. And so instead of arguing, Danielle leaned back slightly and let her eyes wander once more around the room. She noticed then the books. Stacks of them, lined along shelves, spilling onto coffee tables, some stacked neatly on the floor by the window. History books, philosophy, poetry, even thick tomes on economics. There were also novels, their spines creased from love and rereading. Danielle's curiosity got the better of her. "You read a lot, don't you?" Walter's gaze followed hers, and he nodded. "Books kept me company when people couldn't. They still do. Every life lesson I didn't live, I found in their pages. Every question I couldn't answer, I searched for in ink." Danielle smiled softly. She had always liked to read, but rarely found the time anymore. Life, deadlines, and exhaustion had stolen that quiet joy. Hearing Walter speak reminded her of something she hadn't realized she'd lost. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Walter rose slowly, his cane steadying him, and opened it to reveal a tall man in a dark suit. His features were sharp, his demeanor respectful. He inclined his head. "Mr. Hensley, the car is ready." Walter turned toward Danielle. "Go on, Harvey will get you home safe." Danielle hesitated, her heart tugging strangely. She had only known Walter an hour, yet something in her chest told her that leaving now meant stepping away from something important. Still, she rose, thanked him again, and followed Harvey down the stairs. The car waiting outside was sleek, polished, a stark contrast to the cracked sidewalk. Harvey opened the door with a practiced motion, and Danielle slid into the back seat. The ride was smooth, quiet, the city lights streaming past like rivers of gold. Danielle sat in silence at first, her mind replaying the evening like a reel of film. She thought of the spilled apples, of Walter's trembling hands, of his laughter and his stories. She thought of the train she had missed, and how, strangely, she did not regret it anymore. When Harvey pulled up outside her apartment complex, he stepped out, opened her door, and handed her a small envelope. "From Mr. Hensley," he said simply. Danielle frowned, taking it. What is this? You'll understand when the time is right. Before she could ask more, Harvey returned to the car, and within moments, the sleek vehicle disappeared into the night, leaving Danielle standing in the dim light of her street. She turned the envelope over in her hands, its weight heavier than it should have been, as though it carried more than just paper. Her heart pounded as she climbed the stairs to her apartment, dropped her bag, and sat at the kitchen table. With trembling fingers, she opened it. Inside lay a handwritten note in neat cursive for your kindness. We'll speak soon. And tucked behind it was a check. Danielle's eyes widened as she scanned the number. It was not small. It was more than she made in 2 months at her job. Her breath caught, her hand shaking as she set it down. She had helped him because it was right, not because she wanted anything in return. Yet here in her hands was proof that Walter believed in reciprocity, in the ripple of kindness spreading outward. Danielle leaned back in her chair, staring at the note, her thoughts a storm. Who exactly was Walter Hensley? And why did she feel that this was only the beginning of something far larger than she could yet imagine? The invitation. Danielle hardly slept that night. The check sat on her kitchen table, its numbers still echoing in her mind long after she had folded the paper back into the envelope. She had turned it over again and again, almost certain that her eyes were deceiving her, that perhaps she had imagined the extra zero at the end, that maybe she had conjured this whole evening in a dream born of exhaustion, but the ink was real, the signature bold, and the note in Walter's hand steady and unmistakable. For your kindness, we'll speak soon. Those 4 words carried more weight than the numbers on the check. She had helped him not for reward, not for recognition, but because something in her conscience would not let her walk away. Yet here she was, staring at proof that her decision had set into motion something far larger than herself. By morning, the exhaustion of the day before lingered in her bones, but the glow of curiosity burned brighter. She dressed for work, but her usual routine felt different. The crowded train ride, the chatter of coworkers, the endless stream of emails, none of it seemed quite as suffocating as it had the day before. Still, her mind wandered constantly back to Walter. Who was this man with trembling hands and a steady gaze, who carried both frailty and authority in the same breath? Why had he chosen to respond to her small act with such generosity? And most pressing of all, what did he mean by "we'll speak soon"? That question answered itself sooner than she expected. 3 days later, just as she was packing her bag to leave the office, her phone buzzed with a call from a number she didn't recognize. For a moment, she considered letting it go to voicemail. Spam calls were all too common, but something urged her to pick it up. Danielle Porter? The voice was deep, familiar in its calm weight. She froze, the pen in her hand slipping. Walter? You remember me, good. His chuckle carried warmth. I hope I didn't catch you at a bad time. She swallowed, her heart racing. No, it's fine. I was just leaving work. Perfect. Then perhaps you'll allow me to invite you to dinner tomorrow evening. Nothing extravagant, just an opportunity to talk. There are things I'd like to share if you're willing. Danielle hesitated, her practical side screaming questions. Who was this man? Why was he interested in her? Was it wise to accept? But beneath the hesitation, curiosity surged stronger. Something in Walter's voice reassured her. It carried no hint of manipulation, only sincerity. And if she had learned anything from that night at the station, it was that ignoring this connection felt like walking away from a door the universe had opened for her. All right, she said softly. Dinner sounds fine. Good. Harvey will collect you at 7. The call ended before she could second-guess herself, leaving her staring at the phone, half bewildered, half exhilarated. The next evening, when the sleek sedan pulled up outside her apartment, Danielle's neighbors peeked through blinds as though a celebrity had arrived. She felt suddenly self-conscious, smoothing the wrinkles from her dress as Harvey opened the door for her. The drive was quiet, Harvey as composed as ever, and Danielle's nerves built with every passing block. When the car finally stopped before a tall building near Rittenhouse Square, her breath caught. The entrance gleamed with polished stone, the doorman nodding in recognition as Harvey escorted her inside. This was no ordinary dinner. Walter's apartment was on the 12th floor, and when the elevator doors opened, Danielle was struck by the view before she even stepped inside. Glass windows stretched from floor to ceiling, revealing the glittering city lights that spread out like a carpet of stars. Inside, the decor was elegant but understated. Warm wood tones, Shelves lined not just with books but with artifacts from travels, framed letters, awards tucked modestly between them. It was a space that spoke of a life lived fully, not ostentatiously but with purpose. Walter rose slowly from a leather armchair near the window, his cane beside him, his eyes lighting up as he saw her. "Danielle, thank you for coming." She smiled nervously, her hands clasped in front of her. "Thank you for inviting me. Your home is beautiful." He waved a hand lightly as if brushing off the compliment. "A place to live, nothing more. The view is worth more than the walls, I think." They shared a quiet laugh before moving toward the dining table, where a simple meal had been laid out: roasted chicken, vegetables, and fresh bread. Not lavish, but comforting, the kind of food that carried a sense of care. Walter insisted she sit first, and as Harvey discreetly served, Danielle felt the strangeness of the moment fade into something gentler. As they ate, conversation flowed easily at first, small talk about her work, her commute, his memories of Philadelphia decades ago. But gradually Walter's tone shifted, deepening. "You're wondering who I am?" he said plainly, meeting her eyes. Danielle felt her cheeks warm. "I suppose I am. I mean, the check, the driver, all of this. It's more than I expected from someone I just met on a train platform." Walter leaned back slightly, his gaze steady. "Fair, I owe you honesty. I'm not wealthy in the way some imagine, with endless extravagance or palaces of glass, but I have been fortunate. Investments, businesses, years of work that gave me more than I could ever spend alone. What matters to me now is not the money itself, but what it can do, where it can go, who it can help." Danielle blinked, trying to absorb the weight of his words. "So, the check?" "A token," Walter said. "Not payment, never that, gratitude, and perhaps an invitation. You see, Danielle, I've spent years watching people rush by each other, ignoring the ones who stumble. You stopped. You saw me. That matters more than you know. And I believe, no, I know, that people like you are the ones who should be given opportunities to carry something forward." Her chest tightened with a mixture of awe and confusion. "But I'm just me. I work a 9 to 5, I'm buried in emails, I'm nothing special." Walter's smile was gentle but firm. "That's where you're wrong. Kindness is rare not because it's difficult, but because people choose to ignore the chance to act. You didn't. And that makes you more extraordinary than half the boardrooms filled with men and women chasing nothing but their own ambition." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the hum of the city outside. Danielle's fork rested on her plate, forgotten, as his words settled deep into her. After dinner, Walter led her to a smaller study, where shelves groaned under the weight of more books and files. He pulled out a folder and handed it to her. Inside were documents, proposals, even blueprints. "What is this?" she asked, scanning the pages. "Projects I've started," Walter explained. "Scholarships, community centers, mentorship programs. Seeds planted, but seeds that need caretakers. People who aren't afraid to invest not just money, but heart. I'm inviting you to be part of it. Not tomorrow, not all at once, but step by step. You have the empathy, Danielle. What you lack in confidence, you make up for in integrity. That can't be taught." Danielle felt her throat tighten. She had never been offered anything like this, not at her job, not in her life. She had always felt replaceable, another cog in a machine that would keep running without her. And yet here was a man she had known less than a week, telling her she mattered, telling her she could make a difference. She looked up at him, her eyes searching. "Why me?" Walter's gaze softened. "Because when faced with a choice between your convenience and someone else's need, you chose the latter. That is the kind of choice that changes the world." Danielle closed the folder slowly, her hands trembling. She didn't know what her answer would be yet, but she knew this. Missing that train had set her on a path she could never have imagined. The turning point Danielle's life did not change overnight. Not in the obvious ways, at least. She still woke early to the insistent buzz of her alarm, still joined the steady stream of commuters that funneled into the station each morning, still sat at her desk beneath the cold fluorescent lights of the office. But beneath the familiar rhythms of her days, something had shifted. Subtle at first, like the quiet hum of a distant engine that you only notice when the room falls silent. She felt it in the way she carried herself, a little taller, a little more certain. She heard it in her own voice when she spoke at work, less hesitant, more assured. It wasn't money or opportunity that had caused the change. It was the echo of Walter's words, the weight of his belief in her, and the knowledge that one evening on a train platform had placed her on a path she could not have foreseen. Still, the world had a way of testing newfound strength. Her manager, Mr. Callahan, seemed determined to grind her down, assigning late projects and dismissing her suggestions with a wave of his hand. One Thursday afternoon, after Danielle had spent hours preparing a proposal, Callahan glanced at it, scoffed, and tossed it back onto her desk. "Not bold enough," he said flatly. "We'll let someone else handle this." Danielle felt the sting like a slap. Once she would have swallowed the hurt, muttered a quiet "yes, sir," and returned to her emails. But this time, something inside her refused to shrink. She remembered Walter's steady gaze, his reminder that kindness required courage, that choosing to act mattered. And though fear tightened her chest, she lifted her head and met her manager's eyes. "With respect, I believe my proposal addresses the client's needs. If you'll allow me 5 minutes, I can walk you through why." The room fell silent. Callahan blinked, startled by the assertiveness of a woman he had long assumed would bend. For a moment she thought he might explode, but then he leaned back in his chair, studying her. "5 minutes," he said coolly. Danielle's hands trembled beneath the table, but her voice remained steady as she spoke. She laid out her ideas clearly, highlighting details with precision. To her surprise, Callahan didn't interrupt, and when she finished, he tapped his pen against the desk before muttering, "Not bad. Keep working on it." It wasn't praise, not exactly, but it wasn't dismissal either. For the first time in her career, Danielle felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Not because her manager had acknowledged her, but because she had dared to claim her own worth. That evening, she found herself at Walter's apartment again. It had become a rhythm now. Once or twice a week, Harvey would collect her, and she would sit across from Walter at the wide window overlooking the city, listening as he spoke of life with the gravity of a man who had seen both its brutality and its beauty. He asked about her work, her struggles, her dreams, and he listened, not with the distracted half-attention of most people, but with the focus of someone who believed every word mattered. "You stood up for yourself today," he said once, after she had nervously recounted the meeting with her manager. Danielle flushed. "How did you know?" Walter chuckled. "Your voice tells on you. You sound taller, if that makes sense, stronger. The world will try to shrink you, Danielle. People in power thrive when others believe they have none. But remember this, no one can make you small unless you agree to it." The words settled deep in her chest. She had heard motivational speeches before, seen quotes printed on posters in office hallways, but none of them carried the weight of Walter's voice. He wasn't selling her inspiration. He was gifting her truth drawn from years of living, of fighting battles both visible and hidden. As winter deepened, Danielle began to notice changes beyond herself. Walter had started involving her more directly in his projects. He invited her to community meetings, introduced her to directors of local shelters, showed her the scholarships he had funded for students who might otherwise have never touched a college campus. At first, Danielle felt like an outsider, an imposter in rooms filled with people who carried resumes longer than her entire career. But each time she doubted, Walter nudged her forward, reminding her that empathy was a credential more valuable than any title. One Saturday afternoon, he asked her to accompany him to a youth center on the south side of the city. The building was modest, its paint peeling in places, but inside it pulsed with energy. Children laughing in the gym, teenagers bent over books in the study hall, volunteers serving hot meals in the cafeteria. As they walked through, people greeted Walter with warmth that bordered on reverence. He wasn't just a benefactor, he was family to them. In the study hall, Danielle noticed a young girl sitting apart, her shoulders hunched over a worn textbook. Something about her posture tugged at Danielle's memory. She remembered being that girl once, struggling quietly, afraid to ask for help. She approached gently, sitting across from her. "What are you working on?" The girl glanced up, wary at first, then shrugged. "Math, I don't get it." Danielle smiled softly. "I used to feel the same way. Show me?" For the next half hour, she sat with the girl, working through problems step by step, her patience turning confusion into understanding. When the girl's eyes lit up at finally solving an equation on her own, Danielle felt a surge of something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Not the hollow satisfaction of ticking off another task at work, but the deep joy of making a difference in someone's life, however small. When she rejoined Walter, He was watching her with a knowing smile. "You see now?" he asked. Danielle nodded slowly, her throat tight. "I do." That night, back in her apartment, she thought long about the path unfolding before her. She thought of the train she had missed, the groceries she had gathered, the trembling hands of an old man who had turned out to be more than he seemed, and she realized that her life was no longer defined by missed opportunities, but by the choices she made in their wake. Yet even as hope grew, challenges loomed. The following week, her company announced budget cuts. Rumors of layoffs swirled, tension thick in the air. Danielle felt the old fear creeping back, the fear of instability, of losing the one steady income that paid her bills. The thought of unemployment kept her awake at night, gnawing at the fragile confidence she had built. When she confided in Walter, he listened quietly, his hands folded over his cane. "Fear is natural," he said, "but don't let it chain you. The truth is, stability is an illusion. The only real security lies in knowing who you are and what you can give to the world. That can't be taken from you." Danielle wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered. Still, when layoffs came, she was spared. Instead of relief alone, she felt a strange clarity. Her job might remain, but it no longer defined her. She was no longer the woman who lived only for weekends, who measured her worth by deadlines met. She was becoming something else, someone braver, someone willing to step into the unknown. And so, when Walter handed her another folder one evening, a proposal for a new mentorship program, one he wanted her to lead, she didn't shrink back. She took it with both hands, her voice steady. "I'll do it." Walter's smile in that moment was brighter than the city lights behind him. "Good," he said simply. "Then the turning point has arrived." The forever change. The day Danielle finally understood just how much her life had changed began like any other. Ordinary, almost disappointingly so. The alarm clock pulled her from sleep. The coffee maker sputtered its familiar rhythm. The train clattered down the tracks with its usual mix of weary commuters. But there was something different in the air, something she couldn't name at first. She carried her bag to work, prepared presentations, smiled politely at colleagues who barely noticed her presence. Yet beneath it all, there was a quiet steadiness, as though she were no longer just surviving each day, but moving with purpose toward something greater. Walter's mentorship had become a thread woven into the very fabric of her weeks. He wasn't simply an old man she had helped on a platform. He had become her teacher, her confidant, a mirror reflecting back the strength she hadn't realized was within her. Through him, she had entered spaces she never thought she'd see. Boardrooms where philanthropists discussed community projects, classrooms filled with children who needed role models, shelters where the overlooked found warmth and dignity. With every step, she grew more certain that kindness was not a fleeting gesture, but a foundation upon which lives could be rebuilt. Still, life's turning points are rarely smooth. Walter's health began to decline that spring. It wasn't sudden or dramatic at first, but subtle. A longer pause on the stairs, a faint wheeze after walking a short distance, a tremor that shook his hand when he tried to sign documents. Danielle noticed, though he tried to hide it behind jokes and stubborn pride. She began visiting more often, helping with groceries, taking notes during meetings he insisted on attending, and gently encouraging him to rest when exhaustion shadowed his face. One evening, as they sat by the wide window overlooking the city, Walter broke the silence with a sigh. "Time is a thief, Danielle. It takes without asking, and no matter how much you prepare, you never quite feel ready." She turned to him, her chest tightening. "You've given so much, Walter. More than most people could dream of. Maybe it's time to rest." He shook his head, his eyes still bright despite the frailty of his body. "Rest is for those who finish their work. I still have something left to do, and so do you." Danielle swallowed hard, uncertain of what he meant, but the weight in his voice told her the conversation was not casual. A week later, Harvey arrived at her apartment earlier than usual, his expression more solemn than she had ever seen. "Mr. Hensley would like you to come at once," he said. The drive was silent, the city blurring past the windows. When they reached Walter's apartment, Danielle felt the heaviness in the air the moment she stepped inside. Walter was seated in his armchair, a blanket draped over his legs, his cane resting beside him like an old friend. He looked smaller somehow, but his gaze, when it met hers, was steady. "I won't waste words," he said gently as she sat beside him. "My time is shorter than I care to admit. But that doesn't frighten me. What frightens me is leaving unfinished what must be continued. He gestured to a folder on the table, thicker than the ones he had shown her before. Inside are the blueprints, the accounts, the contacts, my projects, my commitments, my promises, and I want you to carry them forward. Danielle stared at him, stunned. Me, Walter, I don't know how. I'm not. You are, he interrupted firmly. You are because you care. You are because you stopped. You are because you believe that one small choice matters. That is more qualification than wealth or power will ever give you. The rest you will learn. Her throat tightened as tears pricked her eyes. She had always seen herself as ordinary, invisible, replaceable in the grand machinery of the world. But Walter, with his wisdom and unwavering belief, had shattered that illusion. He saw her as capable of more than she had ever dared to dream. She reached for his hand, her voice breaking. I don't want to do this without you. Walter's smile was faint but certain. You won't. I'll be with you in every choice you make, in every life you touch. Remember, Danielle, kindness is not a moment. It's a movement. Carry it forward. The weeks that followed were both the hardest and the most defining of her life. Walter passed quietly one morning, the city outside his window glowing with the first light of dawn. The news of his death spread quickly, not just in financial circles but in the communities he had nurtured. Stories poured out, students whose scholarships had changed their futures, families who had found homes through his programs, neighborhoods revived by his quiet investments. To many, he was a benefactor. To some, a hero. To Danielle, he was the man who had taught her that missing one train could set her on the journey of a lifetime. The day of his memorial, Danielle stood before a crowd that filled the hall, business leaders, community members, children who clutched flowers in their small hands. She was nervous, her heart pounding, but when she stepped to the podium, she felt Walter's presence steadying her. I met Walter by chance, she began, her voice carrying through the hushed room. I missed a train because he dropped his groceries, and in that simple moment my life changed forever. He taught me that kindness is not weakness, that helping someone is never wasted, that the smallest choices can ripple into the greatest changes. Walter believed in me when I did not believe in myself, and I will spend the rest of my life honoring that belief, not by speaking of kindness but by living it. The room erupted in quiet applause, many wiping tears from their eyes. In that moment, Danielle knew the torch had been passed. In the months and years that followed, Danielle stepped into a role she had never imagined. She left her corporate job and devoted herself fully to Walter's vision. She expanded his programs, built new scholarships, opened mentorship initiatives that paired young professionals with seasoned leaders. She became a familiar figure in communities across the city, not for wealth or fame, but for presence, for showing up, for listening, for acting. And though the work was hard, though there were days when exhaustion threatened to pull her under, she carried on. Because she remembered. Because she knew the truth. It all began with one choice: to stop, to see, to care. And so, when people asked her how her life had changed so completely, Danielle always smiled softly and said, I missed a train, but I found my purpose.